3 minutes before closing, Lena almost turned the lock. 12 hours, 2 buses, one broken coffee machine, and not enough tips to cover groceries. She had every reason to shut the place down and head home. But something told her to glance outside one last time. That's when she saw him. A kid. Alone. Maybe 10, maybe younger. It was hard to tell. His wheelchair looked like it had been through more than he had. His coat barely clung to his shoulders. No one else around, just him, sitting still under the diner's flickering sign like he'd been forgotten. Lena didn't think twice. He didn't say much when she brought him in, just muttered something about waiting for his dad. She asked where he was. The kid just shrugged. So Lena made him something warm. Grilled cheese. Tomato soup. No menu, no check, just food. The kind of meal that filled you up in places hunger didn't reach. He didn't thank her at first. Just ate like it was the first decent thing he'd had all day. And maybe it was. Lena didn't ask questions. She'd learned not to. What mattered was that the kid stopped shaking. His hands relaxed around the mug. His shoulders dropped. And then, in the middle of all that silence, he looked up and smiled. "I think this is the best thing I've ever tasted." Lena laughed. Not because it was funny, but because she needed to. She told him food could fix just about anything if you let it. He didn't say anything back, but he didn't need to. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that someone was watching. Across the street, in a car no one in this part of town would ever mistake for belonging to anyone local, a man sat with the engine off and his eyes locked on the diner window. He had watched the whole thing. From the moment Lena opened the door, to the way she guided the kid inside, to how she didn't look at him like he was a problem that needed fixing. That man was Anthony Grayson, founder of G-Tech, Billionaire, control freak, and more importantly, the boy's father. He was supposed to pick up his son 10 minutes earlier. A call from Tokyo had pulled him away. He figured the diner would be warm enough just for a minute. What he hadn't counted on was someone stepping in. Anthony didn't believe in accidents, or favors, or kindness, really. He believed in leverage, in exchange, in keeping the world in balance through control. But watching Lena feed his son without asking for anything, without even knowing who he was, tilted something he didn't know could move. In his world, everything had a cost. Everyone wanted something. Yet here was a woman in a cheap apron giving something away for free. That wasn't kindness. That was dangerous. He reached for his phone, eyes still locked on the woman behind the counter. "Find out who she is," he said. "Everything." And just like that, Lena Jefferson's life began to shift without her even knowing she'd stepped into someone else's storm. Lena didn't remember falling asleep. She remembered reheating leftovers, checking the balance in her account, and staring at the ceiling, wondering if kindness still counted for anything. Then came the knock. It was past midnight. No one she knew knocked past midnight unless something was wrong. She peered through the door, expecting maybe a neighbor, maybe the building super. What she got was a man in a coat that didn't belong on this side of town, holding an envelope that looked like it had never seen the inside of a mailbox. He said his name was Anthony Grayson. She'd heard the name, not in conversations she'd been part of, but in news headlines and articles she never clicked on. Rich tech guy. Some called him a genius, others called him dangerous. All she knew was that his shoes cost more than her rent, and he knew where she lived. He didn't offer small talk, just said one sentence that changed everything. "You gave my son dinner." It wasn't a thank you. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement, a fact, hanging in the air like it had weight. Then he handed her the envelope. She opened it because curiosity always moved faster than caution. Inside was an offer, an actual job offer, from G-Tech. Salary that made her dizzy. Full benefits. A title that sounded like it belonged to someone with 2 degrees and a country club membership. She looked up and asked him what this was supposed to be. He said it wasn't charity. Said he didn't believe in charity. Said he believed in balance, in settling debts. Then he said something that stuck. "You saw him. Not the chair, not the delay, not the diagnosis. You saw my son. Do you know how rare that is?" Lena didn't know what to say to that. He didn't try to convince her. Just left the envelope on her table and walked away like it didn't matter whether she said yes or no. But it did matter. She didn't sleep after that. Spent the night staring at the paper, running through every reason to say no. Her mother's voice in the back of her mind. These people don't give you anything without taking twice as much. And still, she thought about the way the boy had smiled over that sandwich, about how no one else showed up for him, about how the world worked hard to convince people like her that nothing they did would ever ripple. And maybe that was true. Maybe this was a trap. Maybe she was walking straight into something designed to break her. But if it was, let it try. She showed up 3 days later in a second-hand blazer and heels that hadn't been comfortable since the Clinton administration. Walked into G-Tech like she belonged there. They didn't know what to do with her. No cubicle, no name tag, no onboarding. Just a private elevator to the 43rd floor where Anthony sat behind a desk that looked more like a museum piece than something anyone worked on. He didn't greet her, just glanced at his watch and said she was late. She told him it was by 2 minutes. He told her he didn't get those 2 minutes back. That was the start of it. He introduced her to no one, gave her no manual, just threw her into meetings and deals like she'd already passed every test no one told her about. People stared, whispered, assumed. Lena let them. She watched, took notes, said less than she knew, said just enough to stay in the room. The room kept changing. One day, it was a labor contract. The next, a press call. Then came a meeting about outsourcing jobs overseas. Hundreds of workers on the line. Anthony told her to sit in. The board expected her to stay quiet. She didn't. Because she knew what it felt like to be the one left behind. She knew what it looked like when decisions made in glass towers wrecked lives in neighborhoods like hers. And when she spoke, the room listened. Not because they wanted to, because they had to. It wasn't about gratitude. It wasn't even about the kid anymore. Lena was in the building now, and she wasn't there to be polite. By month 2, Lena stopped trying to blend in. The whispers didn't bother her anymore. The boardroom glances, the side comments, the passive-aggressive emails, they became background noise. She wasn't there to make friends. She was there to change the math. Her job title still didn't make sense. Strategic advisor, internal relations, special projects, depends who you asked. What she actually did was harder to define. She listened where no one else paid attention. She said things others were too polished or too scared to say. And Anthony? He kept throwing her into messes no one else could fix. One of those messes came disguised as a quarterly report meeting. On paper, it was about cost-saving initiatives. In reality, it was a bloodletting. The head of operations proposed closing 3 domestic plants and shifting production overseas. It would save millions, sure. But it would also gut hundreds of jobs in communities like the one Lena came from. No one in the room blinked. Anthony turned to her, deadpan, and asked what she thought. She didn't give them a speech. She gave them numbers, market trends, long-term damage, the real cost of PR fallout. She framed it not as a moral decision, but a strategic failure if they didn't reconsider. They didn't like it, but they listened. Later, when the meeting cleared, Anthony stayed behind. He didn't say good job. He didn't smile. He just nodded once and said, "That's why you're here." It should have felt like a win, but Lena knew better than to celebrate too early. By the end of the week, the leaks started. Nothing big at first, just missing documents, misfiled reports, a strange delay in her expense approvals. Then came the anonymous tip to HR, alleging misconduct, unprofessional behavior, vague violations of company policy. All anonymous, all baseless, all timed a little too perfectly. Someone wanted her gone. Lena had seen this kind of thing before. Not at this scale, maybe, but the shape was the same. When someone who wasn't supposed to speak up got too comfortable, the walls started shifting. And when the system couldn't discredit your ideas, it tried to discredit you. She brought it to Anthony. He didn't act surprised. He didn't ask who she thought was behind it. He just asked one question. "Can you hold?" Lena said yes, because she wasn't about to give them the satisfaction. But that was before the email. A confidential company file leaked to the press. The sender's name? Lena Jefferson. The digital trail was clean, too perfect. Her login, her timestamp, her name at the top of the paper trail. HR called her in. Legal looped in. The board demanded answers. Anthony didn't say a word. For the first time since she joined the company, Lena felt the floor tilt. She knew she hadn't done it. Anthony knew she hadn't done it. But this wasn't about truth. This was about optics, damage, containment, and she was the easiest fire to put out. Back in her apartment that night, she stared at her phone, waiting for a call that didn't come. She thought about quitting, not because she was guilty, but because she was tired. Tired of fighting rooms that never wanted her there to begin with. But then she remembered the boy, Sawyer, his smile over soup and grilled cheese, how he had looked at her like she was safe, and how she had told herself that night that showing up for people mattered, even when no one saw it. Now someone had seen it and was trying to erase it. She couldn't let them, so she got to work, not to survive, but to win. Lena didn't sleep that night. She combed through every file, every login, every log she had access to. Someone had used her name, her credentials, her work, not sloppily, deliberately. It was the kind of setup that didn't just push you out. It burned your reputation behind you so you couldn't come back. She needed help, and there was only one person who would understand both the stakes and the system. She called Nora. Nora had been Anthony's fixer long before Lena arrived. Calculated, unreadable, and always 10 steps ahead. They hadn't liked each other at first, mutual suspicion. But Nora knew when something stunk, and this, it reeked. Together, they traced metadata, server routes, and timestamps until their eyes blurred. Around 4 a.m., Nora leaned back and said one name, Eric Callahan. 10 years in the company, polished resume, clean track record. He'd trained half the executives in PR strategy and the other half in how to stay invisible when things went wrong. And he hated Lena, quietly but consistently. Not because she was loud, but because she made sense. Because Anthony had started listening to her instead of him. They pulled the thread. Bank transfers, burner accounts, 2 calls to a freelance reporter on the day the email leaked. It was enough. Lena didn't wait for permission. She walked straight into the boardroom at 9 a.m., folder in hand, eyes sharp. The board had already begun circling. There was talk of a leave of absence, pending investigation. A quiet exit, no drama. Lena wasn't interested in quiet. She laid it out. Evidence, names, timelines, motivations. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't ask for fairness. She presented the facts like a prosecutor who already knew the verdict. The room went silent. Eric's face said enough. Anthony didn't interrupt. Not once. He let the silence sit, let it thicken. Then, finally, he spoke. Effective immediately, Eric Callahan is terminated. Legal will follow up. No one argued. And just like that, the narrative shifted. Lena walked out of that room not as a suspect, but as a survivor. Not because she'd been spared, but because she had refused to fold. 2 weeks later, she stood beside Anthony at Sawyer's middle school graduation. He beamed holding his certificate, talking about robotics and how he wanted to build something big one day. Lena told him he already had. Anthony didn't say much, as usual, just leaned in and said, "You changed more than the company." Lena nodded. She knew. That sandwich in the diner, that moment of kindness, it hadn't been a transaction. It hadn't been for leverage. But in a world ruled by power and perception, sometimes kindness was the sharpest weapon of all, and Lena had just learned how to wield it. The promotion came quietly. No grand announcement, no press release, just a new title on Lena's email signature and a key card that opened more doors than it used to. Vice President, Strategic Initiatives. No one really knew what it meant, but everyone understood what it implied. Lena wasn't a guest anymore. She was part of the foundation. It didn't come with less resistance, just different kinds. The stares got sharper. The questions less about what she did and more about how she got there. The word favoritism started floating through back channels, as if a billionaire's son getting fed in a diner somehow invalidated her talent. Lena ignored it. Let them wonder. Let them assume. She was too busy using the new leverage she had. She started with labor policy. No more blind outsourcing. No more pretending margins were sacred while communities collapsed. She wrote proposals that forced executives to consider long-term consequences, not just quarterly earnings. Some fought back. Others adapted. Either way, the floor started shifting. Then came the mentorship program. Not the usual PR stunt, not a handful of interns from top-tier schools. Lena brought in kids from her old neighborhood, from underfunded schools, single-parent homes, community centers where futures felt like lottery tickets. She didn't give them handouts, she gave them access. Resources, room to mess up and try again. For a while, it felt like she was winning, until the meeting with the investors. It was supposed to be routine, a performance review, a forecast update. But halfway through, one of the board members, a man who'd never bothered to learn her name, asked the question Lena had been waiting for. What exactly do we gain from these social initiatives? She didn't flinch, just answered with numbers. Turnover rates, employee satisfaction, retention metrics. Showed them how good ethics were good business. He leaned back and said, "Still sounds expensive." That's when Anthony spoke. He rarely did in these meetings. He didn't need to. But now, he looked around the table and said, clear as a verdict, "Everything we've built since she got here has moved us forward. If you can't see that, you're not looking in the right direction." No one challenged him after that. Back at her desk, Lena sat down and thought about how far she'd come, from a booth in a diner to the top floor of a glass building, and how none of it had been planned. She hadn't chased power. She hadn't asked for attention. She just made a sandwich for a kid who looked cold. That night, she got a call from Sawyer. He told her he'd been accepted into a pre-college engineering program, said he was thinking about designing mobility tech one day. Stuff that doesn't suck. Lena smiled into the receiver and told him the world could use more of that. Sawyer paused, then said, "You know, I still remember the soup." She told him she did too. It was never about the food. It was about seeing someone no one else saw. And now, years later, that moment was still echoing in job offers, in boardrooms, in blueprints for a better world. The foundation launched on a Thursday. No champagne, no orchestra, no red carpet. Just folding chairs, name tags, and people who never thought a place like this could be for them. The Carter Grayson Foundation wasn't built to impress. It was built to serve. Job training, after-school programs, mental health support. Real things for real people. Lena kept the speeches short. She hated the sound of her own voice on a microphone, but she told the truth about second chances. About the kids who were told to dream smaller. About how one moment, one decision to act instead of ignore had changed her life forever. Sawyer was there too. Taller now, still sarcastic, still sharp. He was studying engineering, working on a project that helped redesign mobility aids for kids who hated how medical their wheelchairs looked. He said the goal was to make kids feel like they were piloting something cool, not stuck in something necessary. He got it. More than most. After the ribbon was cut, a woman approached Lena, maybe early 40s, worn-out hoodie, tired eyes, holding a little boy's hand. She didn't say thank you. She didn't cry. She just said, "My son starts here Monday." Lena nodded. That was enough. The rest of the day was a blur. People toured the rooms. Donors clapped. Volunteers handed out flyers. But Lena's mind kept going back to that moment in the diner. How fast it all started. How quietly everything turned. It had never been about destiny. It had been about choice, about paying attention. Anthony never liked to be center stage. He stood in the back during the whole event, watching the crowd, arms crossed, unreadable as always. When things quieted, Lena found him by the exit. He didn't compliment the event. He didn't mention the turnout. He just said, "You built something permanent." She looked at him and said, "We both did." He shook his head. "I paid for it. You made it matter." They didn't say goodbye. They never needed to. That night, back in her apartment, the same one she used to worry about losing every month, Lena sat with a stack of letters. Notes from kids in the mentorship program, handwritten thank yous, a few doodles. One kid had drawn her as a superhero, holding a grilled cheese like a weapon. She laughed when she saw it. But then she sat still for a long time. She thought about how close she'd come to walking away. About how fast people could be erased when no one believed their story. About how dangerous it was to see someone as a burden instead of a person. The world had tried to convince her she didn't belong in rooms with power. But she didn't just belong. She changed them. Not by shouting, not by demanding, but by doing the one thing most people overlook. She saw people. She still did. And long after the lights went out, after the applause faded, after the photos were posted and forgotten, that's what lasted. Because sometimes the most radical thing you can do in a broken world is to care and never stop. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's story. If there's one lesson we hope you'll carry with you, it's this. Even the smallest act of kindness can ripple through someone's life in ways we may never see. If this story moved you or made you think, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And to support our channel, simply hit the like button and subscribe so you won't miss the next story that matters.